Hi. In this lecture, we're going to explore Earth's inner structure, but our goal is not simply to just memorize the names of different layers. Instead, we're going to focus on the processes occurring inside Earth that ultimately shape the ocean basins. Plate tectonics, seafloor spreading, ocean depth, and even ocean chemistry all depend on what is happening beneath the Earth's surface. By the end of this lecture, you should be able to reason through why the ocean floor exists where it does and why it behaves the way it does over geologic time. A useful way to approach Earth's interior is to ask a single guiding question. Why does Earth behave the way it does internally? Why does the planet remain geologically active billions of years after it formed? Why does solid rock flow? Why do tectonic plates move? And why do ocean basins form, evolve, and disappear over time? Answering these questions requires us to think about Earth as a physical system governed by energy, density, temperature, pressure, and time. As we have already discussed, Earth's internal layering exists because of the process called planetary differentiation. Early in Earth's history, the planet was extremely hot due to energy released during accretion, radioactive decay, and gravitational compression. At these temperatures, much of Earth was partially or fully molten. When materials are molten, they sort by density. Dense materials, particularly iron and nickel, sink toward the center, while lighter silicate materials rose toward the surface. This process reduced Earth's gravitational energy and produced a layered planet with a dense core and a lighter outer shell. Importantly, this layering was not a choice or an accident. It was a physical consequence of heat and gravity acting on different materials. Earth remains geologically active because it contains internal energy that is not yet dissipated into space. One source of this energy is residual heat left over from Earth's formation, when repeated collisions and compression converted kinetic energy into heat. A second critically important source is radioactive decay. Certain elements inside Earth, such as uranium and potassium, have unstable atomic nuclei. Over time, these nuclei naturally rearrange into more stable forms. When this happens, a small amount of mass is converted into energy, which is released as heat. Because these isotopes decay very slowly over billions of years, radioactive decay provides a long-lasting internal heat source. A third source of internal energy is gravitational energy. Early in Earth's history, dense materials sank toward the planet's center, while lighter materials rode toward the surface. As dense material moved inward, it lost gravitational potential energy. That lost energy was converted into heat, and that further warmed Earth's interior. So together, residual heat, radioactive decay, and gravitational energy explain why Earth is still hot and geologically active billions of years after it formed. Earth can be divided into layers based on chemical composition, meaning the types of materials that make up each layer. These chemical layers formed early in Earth's history as the planet differentiated and remain distinct today because their compositions and densities are very different. The crust is Earth's outermost chemical layer. It is composed primarily of relatively light silicate minerals rich in oxygen, silicon, aluminum, and other low-density elements. The crust is thin compared to Earth's overall size, but it plays a disproportionate role in Earth systems because it forms the surface on which oceans, continents, and life exist. Beneath the crust lies the mantle, which makes up the majority of Earth's volume. The mantle is also composed of silicate minerals, but these minerals contain much higher proportions of magnesium and iron, making the mantle denser than the crust. Although the mantle is solid, it is capable of slow deformation, allowing it to transport heat and drive large-scale Earth processes over geologic time. At Earth's center is the core, which is chemically distinct from the layers above it. The core is dominated by iron and nickel and is far denser than the mantle or the crust. The movement of material within the core generates Earth's magnetic field, which protects the planet from solar radiation and helps maintain conditions suitable for life. These chemical layers reflect how Earth sorted itself by density early in its history. Understanding their composition is essential for understanding how Earth stores heat, how it moves internally, and how surface features such as ocean basins are ultimately formed. A major challenge in understanding Earth's interior is reconciling two facts that seem contradictory. The mantle is made of solid rock, yet it moves. The key to resolving this contradiction is timescale. On short timescales, such as seconds to years, rock will behave as rigid, breakable material. When stress builds up faster than the rock can adjust, it fractures and produces earthquakes. This is the behavior we are familiar with when we think about rocks at Earth's surface. However, over long time scales, like millions of years, the situation changes. Deep inside Earth, temperatures and pressures are extremely high. Under these conditions, the atoms within solid minerals can slowly rearrange themselves. The rock does not melt, but it can change shape gradually without breaking. This slow, permanent deformation is what allows solid rock in the mantle to flow. The movement is incredibly slow, only centimeters per year, but over geologic time, it's enough to drive mantle convection and plate motion. The important takeaway is that solid rock can behave very differently depending on how quickly the stress is applied and how long the process lasts. Up to this point, we have talked about Earth's layers in terms of composition, but Earth can also be divided based on how materials behave mechanically. These mechanical layers are critical for understanding plate motion and ocean basin formation. The lithosphere is Earth's rigid outer shell. It includes the crust and the uppermost portion of the mantle. The lithosphere behaves as a brittle, solid layer and is broken into tectonic plates. Both oceanic and continental plates are part of the lithosphere, and it's this rigidity that allows plates to move as coherent units across Earth's surface. Beneath the lithosphere lies the asthenosphere. The asthenosphere is still solid rock, but it is much hotter and mechanically weaker. Because of the high temperatures and pressures, rocks in the asthenosphere deform plastically over long timescales. This weak layer allows the rigid lithosphere plates above it to move. Without the asthenosphere, plate tectonics would therefore not be possible. Below the asthenosphere is the mesosphere, sometimes referred to as the lower mantle. The mesosphere is hotter and under much greater pressure than the asthenosphere, which makes it mechanically stronger despite the high temperature. As a result, the mesosphere deforms more slowly and it participates in mantle convection, but it does not behave as weakly as the asthenosphere. The key idea is that Earth's interior does not simply become weaker with depth. Instead, mechanical behavior reflects a balance between temperature and pressure, and these differences control how and where motion occurs within the planet. So let's talk about mantle convection. Mantle convection is the process by which heat is transferred from Earth's interior toward the surface through slow movement of solid mantle rock. To understand mantle convection, we need to focus on temperature differences and density. Deep inside Earth, mantle material is heated by radioactive decay and residual heat from Earth's formation. As this material heats up, it expands slightly, which lowers its density and makes it buoyant. Because it is less dense, the hot mantle material slowly rises. As the rising material moves upward, it begins to lose heat to surrounding rock and toward Earth's surface. As it cools, it contracts and becomes denser and eventually sinks back downward. This rising and sinking of mantle material forms convection cells that slowly transport heat upward through the planet. This process occurs extremely slowly, typically centimeters per year, but it operates continuously over millions and millions of years. By transferring heat to the base of the lithosphere, the mantle convection weakens and softens the rigid outer shell of Earth. This weakening allows the lithosphere to break into plates and move over geologic time, even though the mantle itself remains solid. So take a moment here to pause the video and look at the figure on the bottom right to understand mantle convection. The key point is that mantle convection does not directly move tectonic plates, but it creates the thermal and mechanical conditions that make plate motion possible. To understand why ocean basins exist where they do, we need to understand isostasy. Isostasy describes how Earth's rigid outer shell, the lithosphere, is supported by the underlying mantle. The key idea is that the lithosphere behaves somewhat like blocks floating on a very slowly deforming material. Blocks that are less dense or thicker will float higher, while blocks that are denser or thinner will float lower. This is not because the lithosphere is liquid, but because the mantle can slowly adjust over long time scales. Oceanic lithosphere is thinner and denser than continental lithosphere. Because of this density contrast, oceanic crust sits lower relative to sea level. Water naturally fills in these lower regions and forms the ocean basins. This means that ocean basins are not simply holes in Earth's surface. They are a predictable outcome of density differences within Earth's lithosphere and the way that lithosphere is supported from below. As the density or thickness of the lithosphere changes, its elevation relative to sea level changes as well. One of the most consistent patterns observed in the ocean is that the seafloor gets deeper as it gets older. This pattern is not random, and it is not caused by changes in sea level. Instead, it reflects how oceanic lithosphere behaves as it moves away from where it forms. New oceanic lithosphere forms at mid-ocean ridges and is extremely hot. Because it is hot, it is also relatively buoyant and sits higher on the mantle. This is why mid-ocean ridges are elevated compared to the surrounding sea floor. As oceanic lithosphere moves away from the ridge, it gradually cools, and that cooling causes the rock to contract, which increases its density. As the lithosphere becomes denser, it sinks deeper into the mantle. This downward movement is called subsidence. The result of subsidence is a predictable increase in ocean depth with distance from mid-ocean ridges. In other words, the depth of the ocean is controlled not just by how much water is present, but by the thermal state of the lithosphere beneath it. The relationship between seafloor age, temperature, and depth is one of the strongest pieces of evidence that Earth's interior processes directly shape the ocean basins. One of the most striking characteristics of the ocean floor is that it is geologically young. No oceanic crust on Earth is older than about 200 million years, which is very different from continental crust that can be billions of years old. The difference exists because oceanic crust is part of a continuous recycling system. New oceanic crust is constantly being formed at mid-ocean ridges as hot mantle material rises, melts, and solidifies at the surface. Once formed, this crust moves away from the ridge as part of the lithosphere. As oceanic lithosphere moves away from where it forms, it cools, becomes denser, and eventually reaches regions where it sinks back into the mantle. This return of oceanic crust to the mantle removes old seafloor and makes room for the newly formed crust being formed elsewhere. Because oceanic crust is continuously created and destroyed, it cannot accumulate great age. The ocean basins we see today are therefore temporary features of Earth's surface, shaped by ongoing internal processes rather than preserved for billions of years like the continents. These recycling processes do not occur for continental crust because continental crust is less dense and much thicker than oceanic crust. Even when continents experience volcanism or tectonic compression, the crust resists sinking into the mantle. Instead of being recycled, continental crust is deformed, thickened, and preserved over time. As a result, continents accumulate geological history while oceanic crust is continuously renewed. So up to this point, we have focused on how heat inside Earth shapes the structure of the ocean basins. This next slide here, we'll see that heat also has direct consequences for ocean chemistry and biology. Heat flow from Earth's interior is not evenly distributed. It is highest at the mid-ocean ridges, where hot mantle material rises close to the surface and new oceanic crust forms. This heat warms the surrounding crust and creates conditions where seawater can actually circulate downward through the cracks and fractures into the rock. As seawater moves deeper into the crust, it heats up and reacts chemically with the surrounding rock. These reactions remove some elements from the water and it adds others, essentially changing the chemical composition of both the seawater and the crust. The heated, chemically altered water then rises back into the ocean through what we refer to as hydrothermal vents. These hydrothermal systems are important for several reasons. They help regulate ocean chemistry over long time scales. They transfer heat from Earth's interior to the ocean, and they support unique biological communities that rely on chemical energy rather than sunlight. This slide highlights an important idea in oceanography. Processes deep inside Earth can influence the ocean not only physically, but chemically and biologically as well. By now, it should be clear that Earth's interior does not operate as a collection of independent parts, but instead it functions as a coupled system in which structure, energy, and motion are tightly linked. Earth's internal structure determines how heat is stored and transported. That heat drives motion within the mantle through slow convection. This motion affects this behavior of the lithosphere, influencing where plates form, how they move, and where ocean basins develop. At the same time, surface processes feed back into the system. Cooling of the oceanic lithosphere affects its density and elevation, which in turn influences how heat escapes from Earth's interior. Over millions of years, this continuous exchange between structure, energy, and motion shapes the surface of the planet. The ocean basins are therefore not passive containers of seawater, but instead, they are active features produced and maintained by Earth's internal dynamics. Understanding the ocean requires understanding the system beneath it. Before finishing, I just wanted to recap some of the important terms we have introduced today. The vocabulary on this slide is not meant to be memorized in isolation. Each term represents a conceptual tool that allows us to explain how Earth works. For example, differentiation explains why Earth became layered in the first place, setting up the density structure that controls everything that follows. Rheology describes how materials behave under stress over different timescales, helping us understand how solid rock can actually flow. Isostasy explains why different parts of Earth's surface sit at different elevations, including why ocean basins exist. The lithosphere and the asthenosphere describe mechanical layers that determine how plates move and how the surface responds to forces from below. Together, these terms form a framework for reasoning about Earth's interior. Rather than thinking of them as definitions to remember, you should think of them as tools that allow you to predict and explain Earth's processes, especially those that shape the ocean basins. In the next lecture, we will build directly on this foundation to explore plate tectonics. Plate tectonics is the surface expression of Earth's internal structure and energy, and it provides the framework for understanding the modern ocean basins.